Hello guys, you're welcome to today's tutorial. My name is Amaka and this is Lizama Stitches. So in this tutorial, I'm going to be teaching you how to make an off-shoulder bustier with illusion neckline. So if this looks like what you like to learn, keep watching, click on the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you'll be notified whenever I upload new videos. So let's get started. Now this is my dartless basic bodice pattern. In case you don't know how to draft a basic bodice pattern, I have a tutorial on how to draft a basic bodice pattern. I'm going to leave the link of that video in the description box below so that you can check it out later. Now I'm going to briefly explain what I did here. Now this is my neckline. Now this is my neck width. My neck width is 3 inches and my neck depth is 3 inches. This is my shoulder measurement and I came down by 1 inch. And I came down by 1 inch for my shoulder slant and I connected it to the neckline. This is my chest point. This is my bust point, this is my under bust point, this is my waist point, and this is my seam allowance. Now let me label these lines. This is my chest point, this is my bust point, this is my under bust point, this is my waist point, and this is my seam allowance. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to impute my dart, and for me to do that, I'm going to be working with my bust span measurement. Now the bust span measurement I'm working with is 8 inches. 8 divided by 2 gives you 4 inches. Plus half inch seam allowance, because I'm going to cut it, that gives you 4.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 4.5 inches. From here, I'm going to mark 4.5 inches. And I'll mark 4.5 inches here. And I'll connect it. On this line, on my waist point, I'm going to remove 2 inches for my dart. I'm going to mark 1 inch on both sides of this line. Now on this line, on the underbust point, I'm going to mark 1 inch on both sides of this line. 1 inch here and 1 inch here. Now on this point, I'm going to come down by half inch and I'll go up by half inch. So I'm going to connect this point to this point. I'll connect this point to this point. And I'm going to connect this point to this point. And I'll connect this point to this point. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to find the midpoint of this line. So this is the midpoint of this line. Now from this point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch. And I'll connect this point to this point and this point to this point. Just like this. So I'm going to blend it. Going to blend this part. And I'll blend here. Now, because I'm going to cut off this 1 inch, so this 1 inch that I have here, I'm going to cut it off. So I'm going to extend this line by 1 inch. Now, this 1 inch that I'm going to cut off from here, and the 1 inch which I'm going to use to join it back, I'll return it here. That is 2 inches. So 2 inches, I'm returning this 2 inches here. And I'm going to connect this to this point to create a new armhole curve. So to create a new armhole curve, I'm going to connect this point to this point. Now take note. Now because this new armhole I'm going to create is not going to be as curvy as this. It's not going to be as deep as this because it's off shoulder. I'm just going to do a slant curve to this point because the dress I'm making is off shoulder. So I'm going to do something like this. I'm going to take my horizontal measurement. Now the bust circumference I'm working with is 38 inches. 38 divided by 4 gives you 9.5 inches. Now this is 9.5 inches plus 1 inch for this dart gives you 10.5 inches plus 1 inch, which I'm going to use to join it together, gives you 11.5 inches plus 1.5 inches seam allowance gives you 13 inches. So I'm going to mark 13 inches here. So on the bust point, I'm going to take the bust measurement on the bust point. A quarter of the bust circumference is 9.5 inches. Plus the seam allowance, which I'm going to use to 1 inch, which I'm going to use to join these two together, gives you 10.5 inches. Plus 1.5 inches seam allowance gives you 12 inches. Now on the underbust point, I'm going to take my underbust measurement on the underbust point. So my underbust circumference is 31 inches. 31 divided by 4 gives you 7 3/4. Gives you 7 3/4. Plus these 2 inches seam allowance, which I'm going to, these 2 inches that which I'm going to cut off from here. I have to return it here so that I don't run short of fabric. And that gives you 9 3/4. That gives you 9 3/4 plus 1 inch, which I'm going to use to join these two together, gives you 10 3/4. Gives you 10 3/4 plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. Plus 1.5 inches seam allowance gives you 12 1/4. Gives you 12 1/4. On the waist point, I'm going to take the waist measurement on the waist point. Now the waist circumference I'm working with is 32 inches. 32 divided by 4. 32 divided by 4 gives you 8 inches. So I'm going to mark 8 inches here. 8 inches plus these 2 inches for that, which I'm going to return back, gives you 10 inches. Plus 1 inch, which I'm going to use to join it, gives you 11 inches. Plus 1.5 inches seam allowance gives you 12.5 inches. 12.5 inches. So I'm going to take the same measurement here, 12.5 inches. And I'll connect the points. So now the next thing I'm going to do, now this chest line, I'm going to extend this chest line to this point. So after we have done that, now we are going to create our illusion neckline. Now to create our illusion neckline, from this point, I'm going to mark 2 inches from this point. Now this is optional. You can actually use 2.5 inches or you can use 3 inches depending on how off you want your off shoulder, your illusion neckline to be. So I'm using 2 inches. 2 inches. Now from this point, now I'm going to come to this point. On my chest point, I'm going to mark 1 inch. And this is optional. You can also use 1.5 inches. You can use 1.25, depending on how open you want your V neckline to be on this part. So I'm using 1 inch because I don't want mine to be too open. So I'm using 1 inch. And now on this point, I'm going to mark 1/4. I'm going to use 1/4 inch on this point. Now, there are different ways of doing this. You can decide to end your V-neck on your bust point or on your underbust point. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'm taking mine down to the waist point. I'm taking it down to the waist point. So I'm going to connect. I'm going to connect this point to this point, and I'll connect it to this point. This is how I'll do it. Now after that, I'm going to cut it. Now there are different ways of doing this. Now if you want yours to be off shoulder, you're going to use, now this is the part you will use. You will use from this part. This is the part you use, which means you're not going to use this part. But if you don't want yours to be off shoulder, maybe you want it to you want the shoulder to be full, maybe you still want to use another fabric. You want to use another fabric to make this part and another fabric to make this part, which means you're not going to cut off this part. This is going to be your yoke. This whole part is going to be your yoke. But if it's going to be off shoulder, you're going to cut it from this part. I'm cutting it. So now this is where I will be needing. I'm going to cut off this part because this is what I need for this tutorial. This part is no longer useful to me. So this is what I need. Now here on this part, I'm going to add half-inch seam allowance here. Now I'm going to cut this on fold, and I'll add half-inch seam allowance here, and I'm going to add half-inch seam allowance here on this part. I'm going to add half-inch seam allowance here, which I'm going to use to join this one to this one. So let me draft the back. I'm going to keep this aside and draft the back. Now this is the back panel. This is my zipper allowance. Now every measurement I'm taking, I'm going to be taking it away from this line, just like this. Now I'm going to impute my dart. For me to do that, I'm going to be working with my bust span measurement. My bust span measurement is 8 inches. 8 divided by 2 gives you 4 inches plus half-inch seam allowance, because I'm going to cut it open, gives you 4.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 4.5 inches from here. I'll mark 4.5 inches. And on this line, I'm going to mark 4.5 inches. And I'll connect the points. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to impute my dart. On this point, I'm going to mark half-inch on both sides of this line. Let me label these lines. Now this is my chest point, this is my waist point, and this is my seam allowance. So on this point, on my chest point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch, and I'll connect this point to this point and this point to this point. Let me extend these lines. Now the next thing I'm going to do, now to eliminate the zipper bulge, I'm going to mark 3/4 inch on this point. And I'll connect this point to this point. On this point, I'm going to go in by 3/4 inch. And I'll connect this point to this point. Now this line is no longer useful to me. I'm going to cut it off. This is no longer useful. Now this is my new zipper allowance. I'm going to connect this point to this point because I'm going to cut this. I'm making a princess dart armhole, dart. So I'm going to cut this open. So I'm going to extend this line, to this point, just like this. So now the next thing I'm going to do is this. Now because I'm going to cut this open, the 1 inch which I'm going to use to join this together, I'm going to extend it. Because I'm going to need 1 inch to join this together, I'm going to mark 1 inch here. And 1 inch which I'm going to use to join this together, I'm also going to bring it down here. So I'm going to create a new armhole curve. So this one is not going to be, because it's off shoulder, it's not going to be curvy. It's not going to be deep. It's not going to be as deep as this because it's off shoulder. So I'm just going to draw a slight curve. Now I'm going to take my horizontal measurement. Now on my chest point, I'm going to take my bust circumference. 1/4 of my bust circumference is 9.5 inches plus this 1 inch, which I'm going to use to join this together, gives you 10.5 inches plus 1.5 inches seam allowance, gives you 12 inches. on the waist point, I'm going to take my waist measurement on the waist point. Now the waist circumference I'm working with is 32 inches. 32 divided by 4 gives you 8 inches. So from this line, I'm going to mark 8 inches. Plus this 1 inch for that. This that I'm going to cut off. I'm going to return it here. Plus 1 inch which I'm going to use to join this together. Plus 1.5 inches seam allowance gives you 11.5 inches. So this is it. Plus this 3/4 inch which I'm going to cut off from here. I'm going to return it here. So that gives you 10 3/4 plus 1.5 inches seam allowance. 1.5 inches seam allowance. This is it. 1.5 inches seam allowance. So I'm going to connect this point to this point. Now the same way on this point, I'm going to come down by 2 inches. You remember that on the front panel, I came down by 2 inches. So the same thing I did on the front panel, I'm going to do it here. So I'm going to mark 2 inches here. I'm going to mark 2 inches here for my off shoulder. And now on this point, I'm going to come down by 6 inches. And now I'm going to connect this point to this point. Just like this. Now I'm going to cut it. So if yours is not going to be off shoulder, which means you're still going to need this. You're going to need this. This is your back yoke. But if yours is off shoulder, which it means you're not going to need this. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm not going to be using this. I'm cutting this off because what I'm making is off shoulder. So this is the back panel and this is the front panel. Now I'm going to cut 2 of these. I'm going to cut 2 of these. I'm going to cut 2 of these. I'm going to cut 2 of these, and I'll cut 1 of these, and I'll cut it on fold. This is going to be on fold. Now when I cut this, I'm going to leave ½ inch seam allowance here, and on this one, I'm going to leave ½ inch seam allowance here, which I'm going to use to join these two together. So I'll do it and show you the outcome. Now this is my basic sleeve. I have a tutorial on how to draft a basic sleeve. I'm going to leave that video in the description box below so that you can check it out later. Now this is my sleeve. So this is what I'm going to do from here. Now, that 2 inches that I marked on my when I was drafting my pattern, I'm also going to mark it here. 2 inches. So this is my 2 inches. And I'm going to connect it to this point. I'm going to connect it to this point. Then I'm going to connect it. I'm going to connect it this way. Now for this part, for the length of my sleeve, the length of my sleeve is 3 inches. So I'm going to mark 3 inches. Now on this point, I'm going to mark 3.5 inches. Now I added ½ inch here. Here I marked 3 inches. Here I'm going to add ½ inch to it. So I'm going to mark 3.5 inches. So this is my 3.5 inches, and I'm going to connect it. So I'm going to connect it to this point, just like this. I'm going to cut it. So this is my sleeve. So because I don't want this video to be too long, I'm going to stop here for today. I'm going to upload the remaining part of this tutorial next week. So if you found this tutorial helpful, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, click on the notification bell so that you'll be notified whenever I upload new videos. We've come to the end of this tutorial. Thanks for watching. See you in my next video. Bye.